The sleek, obsidian-colored vehicle sat idling at a Fair Haven intersection, its engine humming a confident, low purr. Inside, the man at the wheel wore a tailored charcoal suit, his posture calm, composed, and unshaken by the rush of traffic around him. His eyes didn't just watch the street. They read it, scanning like a strategist trained to decode silence. This was Desmond Ellis, though the world knew him under another name. To onlookers, he appeared like a businessman lost in thought, but to those who truly knew him, he was a storm contained within quiet. The light shifted green, and in an instant the tranquility shattered. Sirens wailed, red and blue lights painted the luxury interior, and an officer approached with his hand resting tightly on his holster. "Out of the vehicle," barked Officer Kane, his voice dripping with suspicion. The command wasn't procedural, it was personal. Kane's eyes narrowed, his tone heavy with the accusation. "You don't belong in this car." A crowd formed instantly, phones raised like weapons of truth, ready to record. Desmond, steady and deliberate, complied without hesitation. His hands rested calmly on the hood, as if he had anticipated this moment. What Kane didn't realize was that beneath the passenger seat rested a sealed leather folder, embossed with the golden crest of the Department of Justice. Desmond wasn't just another driver. He was a covert federal investigator. And tonight's traffic stop wasn't an accident. It was a trap meticulously designed to expose a system poisoned by racial bias. When the cuffs clicked shut, Kane believed he had asserted control. In reality, he had stepped into the jaws of an operation years in the making, one where every movement, every word, every microsecond of misconduct was being recorded, streamed, and archived. Desmond whispered only once as the steel tightened around his wrists. "You have no idea who you're talking to." That sentence wasn't arrogance, it was prophecy. Because the moment the cuffs locked, Kane didn't just arrest a man. He arrested the evidence, the witness, and the very proof of a culture about to be dragged into the light. 3 hours later, Desmond sat in a gray holding cell, walls peeling, the stench of stale air surrounding him. To anyone else, this moment might feel like defeat, but to him, it was data, an essential variable in a greater equation. His lapel camera streamed everything to a secure DOJ server in Washington, where analysts and civil rights attorneys watched in real time. Kane had already made 3 fatal mistakes: no legal justification for the stop, no verification of identity, and the concealment of federal ID he had found in the glove compartment. Each misstep wasn't just misconduct. It was evidence of systemic rot. Outside the precinct, the video of Kane's words, "You don't belong in this car," had exploded online, racking up hundreds of thousands of views in hours, sparking hashtags and debates. Fair Haven's ugly truth was no longer whispered in barbershops or church basements. It was trending globally. Meanwhile, journalist Maya Chen, who had first tipped the DOJ about suspicious traffic stops, refreshed her feed with a mix of dread and vindication. She had been documenting these encounters for months, compiling a private database of stops that mysteriously vanished from official logs. Tonight, however, something was different. The man Kane had arrested wasn't just another target. He was deliberate, composed, almost too calm. She sensed the orchestration, the weight of purpose behind his silence. Back in the cell, Desmond reached into his suit pocket and retrieved what looked like a pen. With a subtle press of its clip, a coded signal pinged Washington. Phase 1 complete, arrest achieved. Now came Phase 2, exposure. Kane swaggered through the precinct, believing himself untouchable, unaware that every smirk, every careless word, and every arrogant move was already time-stamped and archived beyond his reach. Upstairs, a junior officer named Marcus Reyes stumbled upon Kane's live feed, froze it, and zoomed in on the DOJ emblem glinting beneath the passenger seat. His stomach dropped. He knew he had stumbled into something much larger, something explosive. 5 minutes later, an encrypted file landed on the DOJ server anonymously. The system was cracking, and Kane was still boasting in ignorance. Desmond sat against the cold wall, wrists sore but spirit unbroken, calculating not minutes but mistakes. The real storm hadn't even begun. By dawn, the internet had erupted into outrage. Local anchors softened their language with careful phrasing, but the narrative was unmistakable. A black man in a luxury car had been targeted, cuffed, and silenced without due process. The #driving while black surged across platforms, turning Desmond's arrest into a national debate. At 7:42 p.m., the DOJ account dropped the hammer. A 9-second unedited compilation synced across body cams, bystander videos, dash cams, and Desmond's hidden mic. Kane's words rang clear, "You don't belong in this car," followed by the unlawful arrest sequence. There was no spin, no filter, only truth stitched together by undeniable angles. Fairhaven's shield of secrecy was torn apart overnight. The next morning, 3 black SUVs rolled up to the precinct carrying DOJ civil rights attorneys, federal prosecutors, and inspectors general. They didn't request cooperation. They commanded it with sealed subpoenas and warrants. Kane barely had time to check his phone before his badge was stripped and declared federal property. His arrogance turned to panic as whispers spread through the halls. The mayor's attempt to calm the city with a press conference collapsed spectacularly when Maya Chen confronted her with a signed memo documenting ignored complaints against Kane months earlier. Cameras captured her faltering, her voice trembling as the narrative shifted from isolated misconduct to systemic cover-up. Meanwhile, digital forensic teams unearthed a gold mine, dozens of deleted traffic stop recordings, almost all targeting minorities, carefully scrubbed from local servers but auto-synced to a citywide cloud archive. Each file was a time bomb, and the DOJ had just pulled the pin. Captain Thorne, Kane's superior, tried sneaking his laptop out of evidence, only to be caught by newly installed DOJ surveillance cameras. His career imploded in seconds. For Desmond, this was never about vengeance. It was about patterns, policies, and proof. His silence in a holding cell had triggered a domino effect that now had Washington's full weight descending on Fairhaven. The arrest of one man had become the trial of an entire system, and the city was out of places to hide. 2 weeks later, Desmond walked into the Capitol, not in his suit of quiet authority, but in modest attire, carrying a thick folder. Before the Congressional Civil Rights Subcommittee, he didn't tell his story like a victim, but dissected it like a surgeon. "What happened to me wasn't a malfunction," he said. "It was the system, built this way, rewarded this way, sustained this way." He laid out data, transcripts, and patterns of racial disparities in stops, his words sharp enough to cut through decades of denial. "If I belong in cuffs," he declared, "the question isn't who I am, it's who they are." His sentence echoed through the chamber, sparking stunned silence before thunderous applause. Across the city, a leaked stream of Captain Thorne's internal disciplinary hearing went viral. DOJ attorneys played a damning compilation of Kane's language across 12 stops, revealing a consistent pattern of bias. One officer tried to defend the tactics as high-risk procedure. A black female sergeant shot back. High-risk stops require intensity. They also require standards. This department had neither. The room fell silent. The shield of brotherhood cracked open. What had started as a traffic stop was now unraveling into a public reckoning, a courtroom drama where excuses evaporated under the weight of raw evidence. For Desmond, each testimony wasn't personal vindication but systemic exposure, proof that the rot wasn't in one man, it was in the institution that protected him. The nation watched as Fair Haven transformed from a dot on the map into the epicenter of a debate America had long tried to ignore. 3 weeks after the arrest, the DOJ called a press conference. Desmond stepped to the podium, camera lights blinding, and spoke a single sentence. "I belong everywhere justice is needed." He didn't linger, didn't bask in the attention. He stepped aside as the DOJ director confirmed indictments against Kane, Thorne, and multiple officers complicit in cover-ups. Desmond's words became a rallying cry, painted on murals, printed on T-shirts, etched into protest signs across the country. But behind the headlines, the real work began. A classified DOJ memo outlined federal oversight for the Fair Haven precinct, the first of its kind in the nation. 78 pages of case law, data, and sworn whistleblower accounts detailed how this wasn't an isolated failure but a systemic one, and reform would be enforced from the outside. The DOJ didn't just go after individuals. They sued the city itself for negligent supervision. The case name alone, United States v. Fair Haven, sent shockwaves through municipalities nationwide. For the first time, oversight wasn't a suggestion, it was a mandate. Desmond, meanwhile, returned to Washington quietly. He wasn't seeking fame. He wasn't chasing applause. He was preparing the next case. Because for him, justice wasn't an event, it was a mission, and Fair Haven was just the beginning. Behind closed Senate doors, Desmond revealed the operation's true scope. What Fair Haven experienced was the pilot phase of something called Operation Mirror Protocol, a years-long covert initiative where DOJ investigators went undercover to experience firsthand what it was like to be black in America. "You cannot legislate empathy," Desmond told lawmakers, "but you can document injustice until the law has no choice but to follow." He handed them a sealed envelope containing 47 other precincts under active investigation, each with hidden files, body cam caches, and whistleblower testimony ready to ignite. Senators sat in stunned silence as Desmond explained that Fair Haven wasn't the endgame, it was the blueprint. Across the nation, a quiet storm was gathering, one that would make systemic reform unavoidable. Captain Thorne, once the enforcer of silence, now faced charges of obstruction, stripped of his rank, pleading guilty to avoid prison. His downfall wasn't just personal, it was symbolic. For decades, men like him had thrived in shadows, but now the light was permanent. Fair Haven became the first precinct placed under federal oversight, and universities began teaching Desmond's case as a cornerstone of modern civil rights law. The quiet man in the charcoal suit had triggered a movement larger than himself. Months later, Desmond returned briefly to Fair Haven, walking past the very intersection where it all began. The cracked sidewalks looked the same, the flickering neon signs still buzzed, but the air felt different. A young boy ran up to him clutching a notebook, his eyes wide with curiosity. "Are you the guy from the video?" he asked. Desmond smiled, knelt, and handed the boy a card. "Ask better questions, carry a camera, never let silence be your answer." The boy grinned, and Desmond walked on, unnoticed by most passers-by. To them, he was just another man on the street. But to those who knew, he was the reason Fairhaven no longer whispered its injustices behind closed doors. A woman approached him with a grocery bag in hand, her voice trembling as she said, "Thank you. My son's in the academy now, and because of what you did, he knows how to see people." Desmond shook his head gently and replied, "No, ma'am, you did." His words carried a humility that the cameras never captured because this was never about him. It was about the movement, the shift in culture, the proof that one man's calm refusal to be broken could ripple further than rage ever could. Desmond Ellis never sought recognition, never granted interviews, never wrote a memoir. His mission wasn't glory, it was transformation. He knew that the power wasn't in the headlines, but in the quiet reforms, the data archived, the precedents set. Fairhaven would forever be marked as the place where arrogance collided with truth, where silence became the loudest evidence of all. For the young boy with the notebook, for the woman with the grocery bag, for every driver who feared flashing lights in the rearview mirror, this case wasn't just history, it was hope. And as Desmond disappeared back into Washington's shadows, preparing for the next storm, the lesson remained. Dignity is data, silence can ripple louder than rage, and one man's composure can crack an empire of abuse. That's why his story matters, not just for Fairhaven, but for every city still hiding the same shadows. And now, as you've listened to this story, I want to ask you, what do you think? Could one man's quiet defiance spark real change? If this story moved you, don't just walk away. Subscribe to this channel, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. Because these stories aren't just entertainment, they're reminders that justice is not an event, it's a mission. And together, we keep the mission alive.